let's look at chapter 6, which follows chapter 5. We understand now that there is a new kingdom in place, a new empire, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. And so this is also one of the famous chapters that we all know since we started Sunday school, and even back then in school when we still had Bible lessons in school, they always taught Daniel in the lion's den, or the den of the lions. However, it is going to be a short teaching. There isn't really much to interpret, but just to bring it into context and into line with the prophecies that went out in chapter 2. That is what we need to look at when we study the book of Daniel, is where do we find ourselves now in that timeline, or on that statue that King Nebuchadnezzar sees, because that is what's transpiring now in the world. So the Medo-Persian kingdom was the largest kingdom at this time now. And if you remember, they have conquered Babylon, and they have taken over the Babylonian kingdom or empire. And so King Darius is now in control, who is a Mede. So he's taken over now. And so he has then somehow, befriended Daniel. And Daniel was, one of his favorites, if you begin to read and you understand. Daniel was so distinguished, right, among the administrators and the satraps. But because of his exceptional qualities, because, just the way he handled business, we already know by now what type of man Daniel is. He's God-fearing. He does everything according to the book. He worked for the king prior to this, and he's been outstanding, and they know that they can trust him. And clearly, with such a man, having such a man in your administration, you cannot really be successful without, like we say, cooking the books, a little bit of corruption here and there. But clearly, when it comes to Daniel, that's not what he stood for. And so you can understand that some form or type of jealousy has crept in amongst all the other satraps and administrators, because they couldn't handle such a man who is honest, which is clear in every situation in life. Even with us, if you are the honest one, and you are the one who's always faithful, and you are the one who's always on point, and you want to account for everything, you most likely to not be one of the favorites. And so even though he was, the king looked at him with favor, the rest of the guys on his level did not. All right. So they decided to try and trap him, because they could not find any corruption within him. He just wasn't a man that operated like that. And so you will read in chapter 6, we're in chapter 6 now, 6 verse 5 says, "Finally these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it is something to do with the law of God." So if they cannot find him doing anything wrong in worldly things, let's try and trap him for doing what is right. Right, so that was the conclusion they came to. Okay, they were intelligent. They were, they were men who could obviously reason to some extent. And they could see that we cannot trap him. His books were always clean, so to speak. The business he does was always clean. There was no corruption, nothing happening in that light. And they figured, let's then try and trap him in the things that he does that is good, in the law of God. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king, and obviously they have now drawn up this edict. They have drawn up this agreement or whatever, and he said to them, they said to the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that everyone who prays to any other god or man during the next 30 days, right? So it was just for a month. They wanted to do that because they feel that it will probably just take him about a couple of days to show what he's doing. So they're trying to wrong his right. Right. They're trying to wrong his right. And then they asked the king to, to just issue this decree and to put the writing out there. So everybody needs to it becomes a Medes and Persian law. and everybody needs to just abide by this law. When Daniel learned about this decree, that it was published, he went home and he went upstairs. So clearly they've decided on this decree, or they drew it up without consulting Daniel. And so they went and they presented it to the king. He heard about it and he went up to his room, and with the windows open, we know the story. And then 3 times a day we find that he got down on his knees and he prayed and he gave thanks to God. And so these men went as a group and they found him praying, obviously, asking God for help. Because that was the only way he know that he can be successful, and he know that this will not affect him in any way, is to go to his God, to his Creator, and to ask for help in the situation. Because clearly he's being placed into a position that, he cannot defend himself. And then they went up to the king, asking the king, so have you not published this decree? Because now we've gone and we find that Daniel is still praying to his own God, which is the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so this exile from Judah pays no attention to you, they begin to say in verse 13, and he still prays 3 times a day. And so when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed, not because Daniel was disobeying him, actually because he realized that, his favorite administrator is in trouble here. Did he not think about that when this edict was brought to him? Or did he think that Daniel would be in agreement with this edict? Did he think that Daniel was going to stand for that and not worship his God? Because clearly everybody knew that he was one who obeyed the law of God, and that is why they figured they could trap him in doing what he does for God. And so king became distressed because he realized he got his favorite administrator into trouble. Okay, they went as a group and they told the king what was happening. And, the king gave an order to bring Daniel and then to throw him in the lion's den, because that was what the punishment was. And then he said to him, may your God whom you serve continually rescue you. Okay. They took a stone and they placed it over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signature. He had to abide by the rules and the laws that he has put in order. Otherwise, he will not be seen as a king. It sort of will just come against him, and it would not look right if he, as a king, does not stick to an edict that he has released. All right. However, it's just amazing what the king begins to do. He returned to his palace and he spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, because he could not sleep. So he was worried out of his mind. Daniel has been thrown into this lion's den, and, for doing what is right, obviously, and he finds that he couldn't eat. He decides to fast. He probably heard that this is something that the Jewish people do, the Jewish men did, and he decided to fast. He had no entertainment, so he just set himself aside, or he was just, trying to just remove himself from the rest of what was happening around the kingdom or in the palace, and he could not sleep. So he's been awake all night, wondering what is going to happen. First thing the next day when he sees Daniel, or when he goes out to the lion's den. Then he did. At first light of dawn, he got up and he hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he couldn't help. He was just calling out to Daniel, servant of the living God. Has your God, whom you serve continually, be able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lion. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. The king was overjoyed, and he gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and Daniel was lifted out of the den, and no wound was found on him, because he had trusted God. So if you look back at what has happened here, when we look at the lion's den, it simply just speaks about the tomb that Jesus was placed in. If we want to draw a parallel with, with that event, the king gave orders that the stone be rolled in front of the lion's den. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king has sealed it with his own signature, which just speaks about when Jesus was died, taken off the cross, and the men placed him into the tomb, and then that stone was rolled. The king hurried the next day, just as after 3 days the woman got to the tomb and the stone was rolled away, and the king came and he just found Daniel alive with no scratch, nothing. Lions didn't touch him, their mouths were just shut. And so at the king's command, he took all the men who falsely accused Daniel, he brought them and he threw them into the lion's den with their wives and with their children. Okay, it just shows you the effect of that and how that played out. So King Darius wrote to all the people, nations, men in every language throughout the land. He issues a decree that in every part of his kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Once again, God showed up in this Gentile nation. He showed up for a Gentile king, and he proved himself to be the righteous God, the one and true living God, the God that can still perform miracles, even though his people were in captivity in a foreign land, in a Gentile land. He still shows that he backs his people up, and he stands for his people. He stands for those who worship him and those who abide by the law, and he will always show up and take care of his people. And then verse 8 just says, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, the reign of Cyrus the Persian, which is just to confirm that Darius and Cyrus were the kings, the Mede kings, king and the Persian king who began to rule and reign over Babylon. But also, just as the previous kings, they get tested as Gentile kings in the ways of the Lord and in the way of God, using his prophet Daniel to make a statement in that Gentile nation, to make a statement in that Gentile kingdom, that even though you are these powerful kings and you rule and reign such a broad and vast kingdom with all your riches that you have, I am still King of Kings, I am still Lord of Lords, and I am still the God who reigns. Amen.